what we've got in front of us is a chiming clock, a Westminster chiming clock, which is typical of mass-produced chimes made in the early 50s and probably a little bit earlier than that still. And on the successful completion of this particular unit of training, you should be able to dismantle, clean, reassemble, oil and adjust any mass-produced Westminster chime that comes your way. The actual chiming mechanism is fairly simple to understand, but there are at least three fairly common varieties of chime, and to understand one of them thoroughly, you should be able to tackle the others because the principles are the same, and you simply apply the principles that you learn on this clock to the other clocks, and you should be able to do any of them. Now, a chime is a chime because in addition to striking, the chime actually plays a tune at the hour, and usually at each quarter. The chime most commonly takes the form of a Westminster chime, giving a sequence of 4 hammers, seen here. There will be a sequence of 4 hammers at 1/4 the hour, 8 hammers at 1/2 past, 12 hammers at 1/4 and 16 hammers at the hour. Other tunes are used. In particular, you'll come across the Whittington and the St. Michael. These are played on 8 gongs instead of 4, 8 tones that is instead of 4, and any particular chime will give you the facility of any of those tunes. So by the operating, it's not on the spot, but by the operation of a simple lever, you can have your chime operating on Westminster, Whittington or St. Michael. All that happens there is that the chime barrel, this piece in here, gets shunted along, operating different hammers. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, you try it very fast.
Just to give you an overview of how the chime operates, the cannon pinion behind the hour wheel has 4 lifters, one of which is longer than the other 3. And this is to give the facility of self-correction. Most chimes, certainly mass-produced chimes, have this facility of self-correction, so that if the hands get out of sequence with a tune, the chiming train will be held up just before striking the hour, and then the chiming sequence will be released at the hour, which will bring them back into sequence again. The high lifter then only operates at the hour. Another feature not on this clock is to silence the chime during the hours of about 11 p.m. until about 8-ish in the morning. But I will make no attempt here to describe that. The first one I came across was self-explanatory. I haven't seen any variations on that one, so I think that you will find that you will also be able to interpret when you come across it. Now, whilst a half-wheel warning remains correct for the striking train, the chiming train, where there is a warning wheel provided, the warning is always a 1/4 of a wheel. So you get a 1/4 of a turn on that wheel for your warning. The reason you have less warning on a chime is because you have more hammers to fit into a particular sequence. If there is anything other than a 1/4 of a wheel warning, you'll find that will be pre-arranged by the designer. For example, on the locking wheel, it may double as a warning wheel, and the warning will appear to be less than a 1/4 of a wheel. But if measured on the wheel that the locking wheel drives, it will be found that it will still be equivalent to about a quarter turn on that wheel. That is the wheel that gives the turn to apply. If you had a customer who didn't want the chime, then you would advise using the chime silent lever. Again, not provided on this clock, but most clocks will give you a chime silent lever, rather than just not winding the chime train. If you fail to wind the chime train, the pin in the warning wheel will come to rest with the pin in the bottom by gravity. It's got an extra weight at that point, so it will come to the bottom, and then the lifting piece will butt the pin and cut power out from the time side. So one should operate the chime silent lever and not leave the chime train in a state of rundown. With chiming clocks, usually one can remove the 3 barrels without dismantling the clock. The purpose of that is that it's comparatively complicated, though I wouldn't say it doesn't come under the heading of a complicated clock, but the whole job in dismantling, reassembling and something up like this would take about 3 hours. That would be the experience worth the dread. So there are considerable savings to be made if you wish to fit just the new mainspring.
Sorry,
This particular clock, instead of working with a pendulum or a platform skating as many do, this particular clock has a floating balance. That really causes no particular concerns at the moment anyway. As already mentioned, the experienced worker's time for dismantling, chiming, reassembling, oiling and adjusting a mass-produced chime without major just before we strip the clock to overhaul it, we'll give you a quick overview of how the clock works. Here we've got the chime locking plate, and at 1/4 the chime train will have a 1/4 wheel warning, and the locking plate will operate so that this pin here comes out of this slot and pulls into that. But actually you've got to imagine that as the chime is about to operate and it's going to chime 1/4-2, we'll allow that to happen. So one of the lifters at least now will lift the lifting piece. In here we have the warning detent. So as the lifting piece lifts, we have the warning. And then when the lifting piece drops off the cam, the train should be free to operate, but it isn't, possibly because this one does need repairing. In that case, I'll explain to you what should have happened. The striking train should have operated, and the chime locking plate would have turned until this gap over here is coincidental with that pin. Then the strike flirt here would have dropped, allowing detents inside the clock to operate to cut the chime out. When the clock is due to strike, as it would be during this sequence, there's a high part to the cam which will lift the strike flirt, allowing the striking train to have warning, and then when the chime has finished operating, the strike flirt will have dropped, releasing the striking train so that the clock is free to strike. All of that will become clear, much more clear, as the lesson progresses. But even at this stage, well worthwhile pointing out, I think, that most chimes will have some form of double locking detent here. There is a single locking detent and a double locking detent. And that is connected with the chime corrector mechanism. What happens is that having finished striking the hour, one detent will lock, and any lifter can unlock the train. At 1/4 past, one detent will lock, any lifter will unlock the train. At 1/2 past, only one detent will lock, any lifter will unlock the train. At having completed chiming 1/4 to the hour, both detents will lock, and only the high lifter will unlock the train, and that's how the chime correctly operates. So on the cannon pinion you have a high lifter to allow that to happen. You also have a chime corrector on the either on the back of the locking plate here, or on the wheel driven by the intermediate wheel on the chime train. For this particular clock, the locking wheel, the chime corrector is on the back of the chime locking plate. What I'll do is remove the chime locking plate to show you. The screw is awkward to get at. What I shall have to do to get at it, which is quite common anyway, is operate the mechanism. It appears necessary to turn the cannon pinion, because the reason the chime thing wouldn't operate is because one of the little pinions was doing the lifting. So we'll allow the chime to operate a moment. Right, that is now the hour, now striking the hour. Instead of turning the cannon pinion, I can trigger the next quarter by lifting the strike float. That now gives me access to the screw to remove the chime locking plate, so that I can point out the chime corrector. Here is the chime corrector. I mentioned to you that inside the clock we have a double and a single locking detent. The double locking detent for the end of the hour, the end of the 1/4 past, the end of the 1/2 past will drop high on this can. But having chimed 1/4 to the hour, this lever here will drop into the gap here, coinciding with the 3rd quarter. That will then cause the double locking detent to lock the chime train, and only the high lifter on the cannon pinion will release the train. Now at the moment I expect you only to have a bit of an insight into how it works. What we'll do now is dismantle the clock and then explain in detail what each part is for as we reassemble. Let's start off by taking off those things that you know about, and you'll find you'll be left with very little to consider. You know about racks, so we will remove the rack. You know about racks, so we'll remove the rack. You know about arrow wheels. I have already moved the pin securing the minute wheel, so that can come off. You know about lifting pieces. This particular lifting piece is in 2 pieces. That first one is the actual lifting piece, and the second is your warning detent, the chime warning detent. You know about rack hooks? And you know about gathering pallets, but we'll take the gathering pallets off later. So the only thing on this side that we haven't met is the strike thread. I think before we dismantle any further, we will take the power off the three trains. Normally I would have let the power off even before we've gone this far, but we can still do it at this stage. To let the power off, use a letting down key, wind slightly, disengage the ratchet, and then allow the winding key to slip through your hand, letting the spring down under control. When all of the power is off of the mainspring, just agitate the letting down key to encourage a sticking spring to become free. The same operation for the chime side. Wind slightly, disengage the ratchet, and let the spring down under control. And the strike side. Invariably you'll find that the strike train is on the left, looking at the front of the clock, the time in the centre, and the chime on the right. That's all three barrels down, and I would advise you to double check that by feeling the barrel. There's no power there. There's no power on the time barrel. There's no power on the chime barrel. Next we could remove the barrels. Remove the bridges holding down the three ratchet wheels. Now, in the very early clocks, the ones that were not mass-produced, the ones that parts were individually handmade, you find that most of the parts that may look similar are not, in fact, interchangeable. And it was common practice to identify things like ratchet wheels with the chime by, for example, 1, 2, or 3 dots on the wheel and 1, 2, or 3 dots on the plate. We continue with that practice today, even on mass-produced work, even when parts are interchangeable, just in case a repair has been done and something has been modified and parts are not as interchangeable as they might appear to be. So we continue the practice. But instead of identifying by 1, 2, or 3 pot marks, it's quite fair game to scratch on the reverse side S for strike, or T for time, or C for chime. If you find N scratched on, that is N for main wheel, it could be associated with the time side first. These are already marked because the part has been repaired before. So removes the bridge for the ratchet wheel, removes the ratchet wheel, and then we should be able to remove the strike barrel. This particular patent is one of a variety. This removes, well, for demonstration purposes I will leave that on at the moment. So that's the straight barrel out. Now we do the same with the chime side. Quite likely the chime barrel won't come out because the hammer's in the way, so we'll leave that and take that out later. Now on the chime side, the ratchet wheel bridge can come off, the ratchet wheel can come off, hold the pin out of the way, and then remove the chime barrel. That would appear to be all that will come off of the front of the clock. Always try and leave these in position. Now at the back of the clock, normally I would always remove the suspension spring first. But anyway, now we remove the floating balance. For that I'm using brass lined pliers so that I don't mark the clock. If you have a set of spanners that fit, use them by all means. And carefully remove the floating balance. The repair of that will not be included in this lesson because this is a lesson about setting up chimes, not about floating balances. Next, remove the time train. Removes the bridge holding the time train and removes the pallets, the escape wheel and the two train wheels, one of which passes through the plate to engage with the centre wheel. Here we have the ratio wheels. That's the wheel that we use to bring the barrel sequence, that is the lifting barrel, to bring that sequence in agreement with the chime locking plate that is adjusted on the ratio wheel. That will be seen later. So next removes the ratio wheel. And these two wheels. These have little circuits wrapped around the posts. So remove both of them and then we can remove one of the wheels. The camera was switched off of course to remove those two pins, but now the pins have been removed we can remove one of the wheels there, but the other one of course will have to come off after we've got this plate on. Next I will remove the lever of striking. And now remove the hammers. On different chimes the procedure would be slightly different. Sometimes I remove just the back plate, other times I remove just the front plate, and I may even remove both plates. I think today we'll remove both plates and remove the hammer's block. So that's removed now as a block. We can now remove the other ratio wheel. Remember, we'll have to put that one back on before we put the hammer assembly back on. Now the hammer assembly, wherever I've worked in the past, is not dismantled completely. What we'll do is remove one plate, the front plate, sorry, back plate. There's the chime barrel. We have 4 discs here to operate the 4 hammers. These projections will do the actual lifting of the hammers, and it, of course, a different sequence will give us a different tune. But on the Whittington and St Michael, you'll have 8 instead of 4, and the barrel probably is capable of being shunted up or down to bring different lifters into engagement with the hammers. And in fact, although there will be 8 blocks of lifters, each block would contain more than one disc, so that you get different sequence of hammers. So you get 8 groups of 2 or 3 lifters. Now, most places that I've worked would advocate cleaning that as it is. So one would simply put this by hand into clock cleaning fluid and swill it around, followed by clock rinsing fluid and swilling around, and then over a heater to dry off. Alternatively, one could put it as a complete assembly into an ultrasonic unit. It's unnecessary, but you could in fact dismantle it. I would only consider dismantling the hammer mechanism if I thought there was dry congealed oil in here, and I thought that it would cut power out from the chiming train. Only then would I completely dismantle that unit. Back to our clock. That's all that we can remove from the front. All that can be removed has been removed from the back. So now we take the plate off. I would use a spanner for this, or a blunt top cutter, which has been modified to become now an adjustable spanner. Now carefully remove the back plate. Turn over and inspect just to make sure there aren't any washers stuck to the plate. There aren't, so that can be the one side for clean. And it's usual now to identify the different wheels with a particular train. For example, the strike train is now over here, so I would expect if this clock had been repaired before, I would expect to find S for strike scratched on the wheels there. It isn't necessary to mark every wheel, but take for example these two intermediate wheels. They probably aren't interchangeable, and yet they're almost identical, and rather than have a problem with a clock because they are not interchangeable but no apparent difference between them, and rather than that cause a problem, then we would mark them strike and chime. But don't be surprised to find all of the wheels marked. So that's the two intermediate wheels I just removed, the hammer lifting wheel, the hammer arbor, the fly, the warning wheel. The gathering pallet wheel, of course, won't come out yet because the gathering pallet is still attached to it. We removed the fly on the chime. This one is a centrifugal fly. And here are the vanes. This is particularly useful on a chime because it means that we help overcome inertia when the chime is first operated, but it also means that towards the end of the week, when the mainspring is beginning to run down and there's less power available, that you also have a smaller fly to operate. And it means that the speed of the train becomes more constant. Now remove the intermediate wheel on the chime, the wheel which carries the locking plate, the chime locking plate, and remember that we said that the chime corrector is on the back of the locking plate in this clock. In another clock, expect to find that chime corrector on this arbor. It really doesn't matter which it is, but it will be one or the other if it's a chime corrector. Remove the chime locking wheel. Remove the chime warning wheel. And of course the time barrel. The bush in the front doesn't want to come out, so I will leave it there. Now, as an apprentice, I was encouraged to leave the single and double locking detents in position with the strike flirt. And I think for the experienced worker, that's good advice, because rarely does any problem originate in that area. You can strip the clock, check it for wear, clean it, dry it, lubricate it without removing that, and provided it's adjusted correctly, it is a legitimate shortcut. It saves time. Here we're going to take it out, just in case you have one that's maladjusted. You should then know, having gone through the setting up of that lever, you should then know how to correct it in the event that it is incorrectly adjusted. So to take them out, simply, well, I would first of all draw a sketch of what I've got there. This involves just a simple drawing. Anything that you can interpret yourself to show you what the correct sequence is for reassembly, and then slacken the screw on the arbor. strike flirt, the double locking detent, and the single locking detent. It can better be seen now that the locking detent, the double locking detent, when it's riding high on the cam there, this hook will be clear of the locking wheel. But when this part here drops into the chime corrector, then the double locking detent is allowed to drop and lock the train. So that is the chime corrector mechanism. We will talk about that more during the reassembly stage. Now the gathering pallet is knocked off in the usual way by supporting underneath, a suitable punch on the top, and drive the arbor through the gathering pallet. The centre wheel, if you can dismantle, clean, reassemble, oil, adjust, having checked for wear and found none, if you can do all of that without removing the can and pinion, then don't remove it. But if there is a need, again remove the can and pinion in the usual way, making sure that you check the uprightness of the centre when you reassemble. Well, that's the clock completely dismantled, and also centre wheel anyway. We won't bother cleaning the clock here because this is really a lesson about how to set a chime up and the principles involved. So we will just go ahead now, reassembling, not concentrating too much on the lubrication because there is a lubrication chart to go with this lesson, but I'm more interested, as you should be, right, we'll start by identifying which wheel goes in which section and then just shove it all back in. No need to worry about associating one wheel with another at this stage. That's the intermediate wheel on the time side. Let's go there. Intermediate wheel on the strike side, which will be over on this side. We'll go there. Actually, I find it very useful to help identify which way up bits go. If you put the ones back where you would know where they belong. Like, for example, the gathering pallet wheel can only go in one place. The hammer arbor can only go in one place. Then the hammer lifting wheel, to mesh with all, can only go, I'll have to remove that again first, but can only go in there. Now we can put the intermediate wheel back in. Now we want the strike warning wheel. That's a chime wheel. The strike warning wheel is usually smaller in diameter than the chime warning wheel. There are the two warning wheels. Obviously the strike is smaller. And then the strike fly can only go in that hole and it can only go that way up. So it's really a process of elimination. Now the chiming side, the chiming intermediate wheel has been marked on this side, therefore it will go in that way up. The wheel that carries the chime locking plate to mesh can only go that way up. The chime locking wheel next. Goes in there. The chime warning wheel in there. And the chime fly. If this weren't a floating balance, then you would put in your third or fourth wheel and your escape wheel. But as it is a floating balance, there is nothing else to put between the plates. So we can now put the top plate on. And locate the wheels. So we look for the longest pivots first, and then drop the plate on. Then turn the clock around, thumb underneath, fingers on top, and then manipulate each pivot into its hole and test the end shapes. Now that the plate is on, I would lift each wheel in turn and make sure that it drops under its own weight. That's an indication that there are no bent pivots, no tight holes, and that the trains will be free. Do that with the movement that way and that way, which is now done. Now next I need to check that the locking wheel here and the warning wheel here are correctly associated, so that I would have, when the train is locked, I would have a quarter of a wheel warning. To be able to do that, we need to put on the strike flirt, the single and the double locking detent, the chime warning detent, and the lifting piece. We'll start off by putting back the strike flirt. So drop it partway through the plate. Refer to your drawing if necessary. In this instance it tells us that the double locking detent with this part of the chime corrector goes in next. Followed by the single locking detent. It's the single locking detent that will lift the double locking detent. It's that single locking detent which locks every time the chime train locks. The double locking detent locks only at the end of striking quarter to the hour. The adjustments that we're going to make now are only rough adjustments that may in fact turn out to be the final adjustment. For the rough adjustment anyway, we have two considerations. One of them is that there shall be freedom up and down the arbor so that the arbor is free, but the other adjustment will be the angle of the single and double locking detent with respect to the strike thread. Now to get all of that sorted out, I turn the chime train by hand until the locking wheel locks on both detents. There we are. We now have the locking wheel here locking on the single and the double locking detent. So with both detents locked, make sure that your strike flirt is fully down. Then lightly and only lightly tack down the screw on the single locking detent, leaving a little bit of end shake in the double locking detent and in fact the whole arbor. If the end shake isn't correct, then adjust the colour here on the single locking detent by moving it up or down until the end shake is correct. I did have too much end shake, now I have insufficient. That now feels just nice. So tack the screw down, which is only a temporary adjustment, but may eventually prove to be permanent. Next, I would put on the lifting piece and the warning detent. The purpose of putting that on now is so that you can see where the warning wheel comes to rest when the warning detent operates, and will be in a better position to judge a quarter wheel warning. So, warning detent on first. Naturally, I would lubricate the arbor. Now put on the lifting piece, and the lifting piece goes on so that this pin here rests underneath the warning detent, and this spring here enters that gap. And then replace the pin holding those pieces. Now we want to check, before we check the locking and the warning, we just want to check that this spring here is properly adjusted. When it is properly adjusted, with the cannon pinion totally disengaged from that lever, there should be a small gap, a minimal gap, between the pin and the underneath side of the warning detent. Like that. Just a little bit of clearance there. The purpose of that is to make sure that after lifting, the lifting piece does drop properly, but also to check that if somebody turns the hand backwards, that the lifting piece will return to a position where it will be engaged by the lifters on the cannon pinion. So that's the only purpose of this spring. It has been correctly adjusted now with a small clearance between the warning detent and the lifting piece. Next, we can come back to our original focus, which is to make sure that there will in fact be a quarter wheel warning. So once again, apply pressure with your hand to the intermediate wheel of the chime train, ensuring that the chime train is locked. Now the position is this. Here is your warning wheel. Here is your locking wheel. There is the pin in the locking wheel. And we have two detents there. If this is the direction of rotation. We have two detents locked. Now the warning wheel should be positioned such that, supposing the warning detent were vertically underneath the pivoting point for the wheel, then when the locking wheel is locked, the pin in the warning wheel should be 90 degrees from the warning detent. This wheel, of course, turns in a clockwise direction in the front of the clock. So that is what I'm checking for. I am checking that with the locking wheel locked, the pin in the warning wheel is a quarter of a turn from the warning detent. If it's not, then I have to separate the plates and move the warning wheel in relation to the locking wheel. Now, in fact, the pin in the warning wheel is not at 90 degrees from the locking wheel, from the warning detent. It's about 170 degrees from it. Now, because I just put the wheels back in without bothering to associate any wheels, the pin in this wheel could be virtually anywhere when the locking wheel is locked. In this particular instance, it happens to be here, which is about 170 degrees away from the warning detent. So I'm going to separate the plates slightly, disengage the pinion of the warning wheel from the locking wheel, turn it by 80 degrees, and then reinsert the pivot and test again. You may find you come to a position where your warning is just a little bit more or a little bit less than a quarter of a wheel. As a general rule, particularly if you have an 8-panel chime, where I have a choice of a little more or a little less, I would be likely to go for a little less warning, because I have more hammers to get into a given space. So next, I slacken or even remove the screw next to or on the pillar which is closest to the warning wheel. The other screws I slacken generously, and the bottom screws, or nut-on screw rather, just a small movement there. So what I should be able to do now is hold the locking wheel against the locking detents in here, the single and the double. Then, by levering against the plate, I shall disengage like that, disengage the warning wheel from the locking wheel, turn it by the required 70 degrees, and then relocate the pivot. And then check. So I'm reversing the train just to make sure the car goes back on again in the right direction, and the train is now locked securely, and my pin in the warning wheel is marginally less than 90 degrees from the warning detent. So in other words, my pin in the warning wheel is now at that position there. So close to a quarter of a wheel that I can leave it. My only option would be to put it up here, and that's now I think we'll put the barrel in, because there's more checking to be done on the chiming train, and pushing the wheels around by hand gets to be a bit sore, so we'll put the chime barrel in at least. The chime barrel is usually the largest one. Naturally we'll oil the pivots first. Replace the chime ratchet wheel. We're looking for C for chime. That one is marked both S for strike and C for time. That one is marked T for time on both sides. Well, these have been marked incorrectly on a number of occasions, and I really don't feel that it matters. I think as they have been incorrectly marked, I'm loading them one on top of the other. They appear to be identical, even though the chime barrel is the largest, so it really doesn't seem to matter. Now the ratchet wheel bridge. And I think, yes, this will be C for chime. I put a drop of oil underneath the ratchet wheel first, and a drop on the teeth and a drop on the ratchet. Tighten it down, and then make sure that the bridge is centred up so that we don't scrape away one side of the bridge. Now put a little power on.